Hello, hello. This is the Green Growth CPA's monthly industry update. Now for June, even though it's July, but you'll forgive us that. I'm just going to wait a couple minutes as the room fills in, and then we'll get started here in earnest. Before we do, I'll just get the legal stuff out of the way. As always, the information contained in this presentation is meant for guidance purposes only and not as professional legal or tax advice. Further, it does not give personalized legal, tax, investment, or any business advice in general. So we are here chatting, talking cannabis stuff. None of this is legal or binding. It's good. It's just good advice, but follow it to your own content, I guess. And real quick, just about Green Growth as well. So we're a boutique CPA and advisory firm focused solely on the cannabis industry. And by our calculations, we are the largest cannabis-only accounting firm. We've got 600 clients in markets throughout the U.S. We've got a full suite of services, tax, outsourced CFO, M&A, prep and due diligence, audit and insurance, all of that. So if you have any technical accounting questions, we can answer them for you. And do check out our channel here. We've got almost 200 videos on all kinds of operational and accounting and financial advice for the cannabis industry and so on. So hello, Sunshine Jenkins. Nice to see you there. All right, we're going to get started here. So let me just introduce myself. I'm Chris Lenz. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Green Growth. I'm, as of today, starting my third month in this position. So those of you who have been with the channel for a long time, you've seen some changes. That's because I came on board. Unfortunately, our former CMO, Jim Brees, the much beloved Jim, has moved on to other things. And so they brought me in and we're trying to do our best. So things have changed. If you're not liking the look, if you want some topics you'd like us to discuss, please let us know in the comments, and we'll do our best to get you guys the info that you're looking for. And so we're going to do things a little different today. I'm going to do my usual roundup of mostly just legalization news and market news. But we've also got a special guest today. So the second half of what we're going to be working on is going to be directly related to what I see as the most pressing issue the U.S. cannabis and Canadian cannabis industry is facing right now, which is this historic heat wave. The season has not started well. Let's just say that. We've got crazy temperatures all over. We've got wildfires starting. And so I thought to provide some good practical guidance on that, I'd bring in the, one of the best cultivation experts that I know, Mr. Brian Campbell, Ph.D. So I'm going to bring him on right now and let him introduce himself. Hello, Brian. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thanks. So just to introduce myself, I am a cannabis geneticist and plant breeder. I have worked in the cannabis industry for about 20 years at this point, in a lot of different capacities throughout cultivation and medical marijuana programs. I have spent about 10 years in academia publishing papers about genetics of the cannabis plant. I've worked extensively with both THC type cannabis and hemp, industrial hemp, CBD hemp, every different type. I'm currently a plant breeder for Charlotte's Web, and I just want to make it clear that I am here representing my own views today. I'm not representing the company officially, but here as a geneticist, scientist, plant breeder, cultivator, and cannabis enthusiast.
An all-around great guy. And in the efforts of full disclosure, Brian and I have been friends since we were in high school, well, junior high technically, yeah. And we launched our cannabis careers together, I believe in the basement of my parents' house when we were in high school, as we were doing what I'll call product testing while playing ping pong. And then Brian got into the cultivation game very early on and has just absolutely turned into an expert. And when we first got started, we couldn't even imagine a legal cannabis market, nevertheless having jobs in this industry. It was impossible. This was the late 90s, early 2000s. And today we both work in cannabis legally. It's incredible.
Yep, here we are, living the dream.
Yeah, Brian is an actual PhD of growing cannabis. It's more technical than that, but essentially. So Brian's just going to hang out and ride shotgun with me as we talk about a little bit about some of the big sort of legalization news. And then, we're going to do the second half. We're just going to talk about this heat wave. We're going to talk about the impact on the industry, try to provide some guidance for cultivators, and just talk a little bit about just the impact, what to do, what's coming, all that kind of stuff. So we'll get started. So this was a really big week, really big month, but especially this week for cannabis legalization, because we had 3 new states officially decriminalized this week or came online. The markets aren't online yet, but it's officially decriminalized: New Mexico, Connecticut, and Virginia. So that's great news. 3 new states. That puts it up to 18 plus DC with decriminalized adult use cannabis. That is crazy. It's all happening so fast.
Yeah, that's up to like 30, including medical, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it's just happening everywhere. It's good, I think, to just take a step back sometimes and be like, oh yeah, another state's coming online, no big deal. It's like, holy crap, like this is really happening. It's happening all over. It's pretty incredible. So let's just take a quick look at some of those states. So New Mexico, decriminalized up to 2 ounces. Cultivation is going to start this fall. We talked a little bit about it last month on this, with adult use sales scheduled for April of 2022. And they've released the regulations. They're not terrible. It's a 12% excise tax, and then sales tax from 5 to 9%, which is about 17 to 20% effective tax rate, which is kind of in the middle. It's not as bad as California or Illinois, better than not as good as some other states. Brian, we spent a good amount of time in New Mexico. How are you feeling about New Mexico coming online? Is it a good environment for grow?
There's a New Mexico? No, I'm just kidding. It's one of those places. It's very similar to Colorado. I mean, there are our next door neighbors and have a handful of different environments like we do, but it's not one of those states where you're going to be doing extensive outdoor cultivation. Mm-hmm. It is a state that has some interesting southern climates, which opens some other options. Like if you're doing some sort of off-season crops, I know Arizona, New Mexico, you can run things in winter that would not be an option other places. And so I know there are people that do things like cultivate autoflower varieties down in the winter on the southern edge, and then everything up to in the north, it's mountains and like high country in Colorado. So totally different environments. Certainly there is going to be a robust indoor THC market without a doubt. And I think it's interesting. I mean, New Mexico is one of those states like Colorado that had a long history of cannabis use that was illicit but known and accepted. And so it should be interesting to see that come online. I think it'll look a lot like Arizona has and Colorado as well.
Yeah, agreed. I think Arizona is definitely the most obvious sort of parallel. New Mexico doesn't have the same population levels, but I mean, I like the rules and regulations in New Mexico. I think are pretty legit. So I think we're excited about that. Virginia, another one coming on, not coming online, but decriminalized possessions up to 1 ounce, and you can start cultivating up to 4 plants. But sales aren't going to start till 2024. Virginia is just a fascinating one to me, even though the market isn't really worth diving into. But it's the first southern state to go to decriminalize and set up an adult use market. And not just that it's a southern state, because it's like, yeah, Virginia, it's kind of like a border southern state. But what's fascinating to me about Virginia too is that it's all of the essentially major military bases and government headquarters many of them are in Virginia, like famously the FBI is in Quantico, which is pretty sure is in Virginia. And so it's a pretty big sort of culture kind of a shift there. And I think it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I've joked frequently lately that the only true bipartisan topic anymore is cannabis.
It's getting there, right? Sort of.
Yeah, it's surprising. I mean, there's a lot of crossing lines there and working across the aisle to push through legislation on these things, and that's a small light of hope in a very divided country right now. So.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think it is really fascinating that, behind the 2018 Farm Bill, Mitch McConnell was the man behind, essentially almost single-handedly to a certain extent, got those regulations. And he's still a notorious cannabis hater. But yeah, it's just kind of showing.
Well, and there's some telling things like John Boehner, when he was in office, he was staunchly anti-cannabis, and then gets out of office and immediately joins the board of a massive cannabis company. And so it's like, even if they're not publicly supporting it, because it's still a little tense of a situation within the party, it's like most of them personally are not entirely against it, or see some reason to wiggle room there, to have some wiggle room. Like there's the obvious personal liberty stance that fall into the Republican camp, and a number of other things that make sense, and make it not just a liberal issue. I mean, in the cultivation community, it's almost more heavily conservative than it is liberal, and so that creates its own interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and there's one big factor you're leaving out too that's very enticing to Republicans, to liberals, to whoever, and that's
money.
There it is. As soon as it's those tax revenues, I mean, all these.
Well, at this point, if you're a state that makes it illegal, you're sinking money into fighting it while other states are making money from it, and that's becoming a more and more bitter pill to swallow for the holdout states.
Yeah, absolutely, indeed. And then third one that's sort of decriminalized as of today. I think Virginia and Connecticut were today. The first is Connecticut, which not too big of a surprise. I'm actually a little surprised by how quickly it happened. We were just reporting on the House passing the bill, and the Senate did it right away, and then the governor signed it just a couple weeks ago, and boom, just like that, decriminalized possessions up to 1.5 ounces. And they do have the licensing rules in place, and they're taking a really progressive stance. At least the initial analysis is they got 50% of all licenses are going to be social equity, and so we've seen a lot of sort of hemming and hawing and good intentions gone bad with social equity licensing, but I'm just glad it's still in the conversation. It's such a huge part of making this industry sustainable and just. So yeah, and then cultivation applications will start this summer. So if you're getting your grow ready to go, it hasn't been announced yet, but that's the expected time. And then we're looking at May 2022 for the market to open up fully. So we'll see about that. Connecticut, that leaves, I think, New Hampshire as the last New England / Northeastern state.
Yeah, Vermont and New York just both came online recently.
Yeah, and then, of course, Maine's been around for a while. Massachusetts around for a while. And it's kind of odd. I've always thought of New Hampshire as like being pretty chill, but they've been a little slow on this one for whatever reason. Similarly, Rhode Island, their Senate just approved a bill. Could be the next state to go. And they're probably going to call it a special summer session in the House to move it along. So that's interesting. But soon, I mean, we're just a couple of months out from so the West Coast has already fallen. That's right phrasing, but now the East Coast as well, at least the Northeast. And then just another kind of roundup of other news. Some semi-good news out of Montana. So as we know, the voters approved a adult use market last fall. That was very exciting. And but we saw what happened in Mississippi, which is voters voted for something, and then all of a sudden legislators or the courts start getting involved, and they start to thwart the will of the people, which is very frustrating, very anti-democratic process. And I went on a little rant about it last month regarding to Mississippi. I'll spare everyone that, but let's just say, I mean, it's a democracy. That's the entire thing. Is people vote for it. It's just as simple as that. But so anyway, let's go ahead.
It should be as simple as that. I mean, there's plenty of cases where people elect officials and then vote on things, and then there's some discrepancy between how elected officials want to deal with things versus their constituents. But certainly, this is one of those things where it's good for things to be challenged in court. It's good for things to go through that process because, it's like with a patent or anything else, it doesn't really hold up until it's been challenged in court and there's been rulings made about it. So it's what I see is like some frustrating but necessary growing pains on the way to this being regulated properly, and people feeling like they've made their proper say about it, taken a stance, had their input, and have been heard. And then from that point, you can make hopefully some common sense rules around it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very optimistic and even-headed approach. I like that. That's great.
Feeling gracious today. So.
Yeah, I'm more frustrated. I'll do a little good cop, bad cop, I guess. So anyway, the Montana legislature, they did water down the adult use bill a little bit. We talked about that a little bit last month, but all of the legal challenges have been dropped as of this week, I believe. And so it's moving forward. So that's good. They did push it back a little bit, but it is moving forward. Some other good news, Louisiana has had a medical market for quite a while, but it is one of the smallest, most expensive, and most restrictive. It's essentially one of those that's essentially legalized, but it's not really for medical. But just this week, I believe, they opened it up to smokable flower. And I'm just like really excited and sort of can't believe how legalization is spreading through the South. I mean, the thing in Mississippi was really exciting. Of course, the state Supreme Court ruined that, but Louisiana's opened up. Alabama just got medical in, and so on. So that's
and even Florida. I mean, they've had medical laws for a long time now, but they were highly restrictive, and they're getting better over time as well. So there is, albeit a slower trend, it's still a trend towards liberalization. Yeah,
and then especially with our current cultural political climate, that people are not, like you were saying, that is becoming a bipartisan issue, and it's especially with medical cannabis, it is a access to medicine issue, and to deny it people of their medicine is, I just know how cruel you have to be.
Yeah, throughout my career, Colorado being one of the very first states to legalize, I've interacted with a lot of medical refugees, and it's a heartbreaking thing to hear stories about parents who have had to uproot from their entire communities, their families, everyone they know, for the sake of their child or for their partner or someone in their nuclear family. And they know it's the right thing to do because they've seen the benefits firsthand. And really, that is mind changing for so many people. Once they see the actual power of how that can help people, it's a big force. You can't ignore it. You can't know that option's out there and not help a loved one. And so it's pretty heartbreaking to see these people have to pull apart from their communities and their families just to have access to medicine. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and in a certain way, the timing from a cultural perspective can't be any better. We're at the height of the opioid crisis, that this is a legitimate alternative for a lot of people that can help with that. And so moving along, we've got one of the more disappointing things that happened this previous year so far was that efforts to legalize in Minnesota. They got killed. They got stalled because the state Senate did not pick it up and vote on it. But as of relatively breaking news, I think last week, they noted that they're intending to discuss it in a special session called this summer. And so Minnesota, which is classic Midwestern state, I think it's relatively liberal. A little surprised that they've been so slow to do it, but making some progress there. How is growing up in Minnesota? Is that pretty good?
Well, it's not bad. It is certainly a hub for major commodity crops. There's massive acreage of corn and soybeans and things like that in the state. They have lots of water, which is necessary to grow any cannabis. That was one of my first publications was about surrounding some of the myths about water use in cannabis production, because it's a competitive crop, but it's not a miracle crop. This is one of the things that I've tried to debunk throughout, especially my academic career, is I see a lot of people that are pro hemp and pro cannabis making all these claims about the efficiency of water use or nitrogen use or all these things. And to get the plant to survive, it takes pretty minimal inputs. But if you want it to perform like a high performance crop and be competitive with other crops, it takes inputs. It takes fertilizer, it takes water, the basic things, good soil. But certainly Minnesota has that in spades, and it's already a hub for cannabis research. Really, George Weeblin's group at University of Minnesota have been publishing papers on cannabis since before almost anyone else. I've hung out with George a number of times, and he works under really restrictive conditions where he was doing this project collecting feral hemp and had to, it's ditchweed. It's growing everywhere in Minnesota. And he just wanted to like sequence it and collect it. He had to go through all these restrictive things with the DEA, and he had to have this specially certified safe that he drove around with in the back of an SUV. Like someone's going to try and steal his leaf samples of feral hemp, but and that would just corrupt such a huge portion of the population. But in any case, it will be nice to see that because, production-wise, it's as good as any of the Midwestern states, which are really about the best you can have for production of any crops. And on top of that, it just will sort of unify that region.
Yeah, and that reminds me that you celebrated an important landmark today. Landmark, is that the right word? Where you published your dissertation, right?
Oh, well, that was that's been published. This was a new paper that was incorporating work from my genetic architecture studies in my PhD, and my after I graduated, a new grad student came on into the McKay lab, Patrick Woods, and so he picked up that thread and did a bunch of validation work where we took basically genetic sequences that I had identified in my study and expressed them in yeast to show that there were actual differences between the allelic copies of the same gene. And so it was a combination of the original work of discovering quantitative loci in the genome, as well as validation work looking at functionality of the actual sequences identified. So a cool paper, something I'm stoked about. It was published in Genetics officially a couple days ago.
Yeah.
It's open access for anyone that wants to check it out, but it is some cool work, and some of the first genetic architecture work that's been published on agronomic traits in cannabis, which is interesting, as well as a whole slew of biochemical work that we did, which looks more at quantitative aspects of biochemical production in the plant, as opposed to some of the earlier research that has been published by George Weeblin and others about more of the qualitative aspects. But in any case, it's a cool paper, and I'm stoked that it is finally officially out.
Yeah, if anyone wants to read that, just reach out to us. We can share the link. And it also reminds me that anyone in the audience right now, if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, please do drop them into the chat, and we will do our best to answer. Couple more things I wanted to discuss. So North Carolina, there's been a little progress there. The State Senate Judiciary Committee has approved a medical cannabis legislation. So it's a long way to go, but again, it's incremental movement in a southern state and in a big, highly populated state. So that's really exciting, and be a great growing environment, right? Carolinas. Yeah,
sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have their challenges. I've done a fair amount of farming and worked with farmers down in the Southeast, and it's like you trade one challenge for another. Mm-hmm. When it comes to crops, often in the Southeast, they have a lot of issues with disease in cannabis that we don't have in other regions. But water's plentiful and soils are sandy and decent. And that's a big part of the fight. So certainly you have options down in the Southeast of dryland farming, which you don't have out in most places in the West. It's just too dry to not irrigate a crop out here. But you have the opposite problems where it's too wet and you've got fungal pressure and you've got bacterial issues and all kinds of things like that. But the farming's never easy no matter where you're at. But certainly that's a good production region. It'll be cool to see them come online and see what they do.
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, we got a question that I think you're the perfect guy to ask. And Sunshine, I hope you're asking about academic cannabis programs, right? If so, Brian, let's list off. Let's start with undergrad, sort of leading into grad.
Yeah, there's a number of programs that have come online in the last few years. I haven't kept as close in touch with them as I did back when I was in academia, but I know Cornell has rolled out a program. In Colorado, they created like a a specialty for it at Colorado State. There is some work starting to get underway at UC Davis. I know Oregon State just opened in the last 2 years here the Global Hemp Innovation Center, I think it's called. And they're doing tons of cool research. They have programs there. Oregon's been very accepting of cannabis for a while now. They like full adult use came on a little bit later than Colorado, but they've been very supportive of hemp and had really liberal rules there. And so that's been like private-public partnerships funding that. Colorado's also working on putting together a hemp center of excellence, which is kind of a similar idea that will broaden some of those options as well. But I mean, yeah, if you're seriously looking into going and studying at a school, look into the different programs. I know there's a bunch I don't know about that it seems like I hear about them popping up left and right these days. And like when I first went to school, it was unheard of. I mean, when I started my PhD, it was like the same year that the 2014 Farm Bill passed, and they were like, we can't touch hemp with a 10-foot pole. And then suddenly the next season, I'm the first person in the state of Colorado planting cannabis on a college campus. So it changes.
Not
quickly.
The first, but maybe the legally, the
yeah,
regulated
maybe
one.
the first legally sanctioned crops out at the research farm, at least. But, yeah, it's changing rapidly, and there's starting to be more and more options and better options. But you know, like I said, there's some resources for that. I'll have to look around and see if I can find some sort of good list or something. But it's a pretty exciting time if you want to learn about it, because there's programs popping up in all different facets of it, from medical aspects to business aspects and genetics and crop management and all these different things. So I do know that you know, like University of Kentucky's been doing a lot of hemp work since the beginning. NC State, there's a handful of universities, but as far as the specific programs, I'd have to dig into that a little more.
Yeah. And then, yeah, just to recap, we got Cornell, Colorado State. I know here in California, we're very proud of UC Davis's program. And then not on cultivation, but UCLA has done a ton of work regarding laws and regulations and studies, cultural studies and things like that. So yeah, there's tons of good stuff. Do want to touch, I don't want to run too long here. I just want to make sure I touch on what I think is the biggest story of this month. And this is just from earlier this week, on Monday. And that was Clarence Thomas, maybe arguably one of the most conservative Supreme Court justices, issued a letter stating that, criticizing the federal prohibition of cannabis on multiple levels, and some pretty incendiary kinds of things he was saying it's borderline unconstitutional for the federal government to be interfering with legal state laws, saying that this piecemeal approach of saying it's legal or illegal at the federal level, but sort of letting the states do it doesn't make any sense. And so, I mean, it's just pretty crazy. And it came in response to and on the heels of the third time that the Supreme Court has refused to hear arguments arguing against 280E and the unconstitutionality of 280E and the cannabis laws. And so while they're throwing out the one case, Clarence comes around the other side and says, actually, no, there's actually a lot of issues here and so on. What were your thoughts on that, Brian? Were you following the story?
I have read the headlines. I haven't really dug into everything he wrote so far. So kind of wishing I had, but it's interesting. I mean, it's certainly one in another piece of this puzzle that needs to come together. I mean, I've been saying that this was a large discrepancy for decades at this point. But to see a Supreme Court justice, and particularly a notably conservative Supreme Court justice, come online with that stance, I mean, it's one of several pieces that need to be changed. Like, it blows me away that the FDA still holds the stance that there's no medical benefits to cannabis when they've sanctioned multiple FDA-regulated drugs for medical purposes derived directly from cannabis without alteration. And so, you know, it's one of these things where everyone knows it's a glaring discrepancy. Something should be done about it, but the, you know, powers that be are often slow to move on these things because they know that there will be long-lasting implications if they do take any action on it. So, and a lot of them are happier to just let it play out in gray area and not have to come down definitively on it. But every time that someone does, it's just another nail there that fastens this down as something that's not going to just go away overnight. Mm-hmm. But it's an important piece because it's gone on for way too long that people run legal dispensaries and then the feds come in and kick in their doors and arrest them like they're criminals. And you can't say that something is legal and set up a whole framework for people to do business and then come in and crack heads and tear out their inventory and just cost people massive amounts of money going through court on this stuff when it's been clearly sanctioned by their local government, their state government, and the powers that be. And there's been all kinds of federal memos saying they won't interfere, but then they occasionally do, and they pick and choose when they will. And I think clarity is absolutely necessary, and I'd love to see some sort of full Supreme Court ruling on that.
Yeah, that's the kind of the really fascinating thing about the Clarence Thomas aspect too, is he's not coming from a advocacy kind of perspective or a social justice or anything kind of that. He's coming from a very conservative background of small government, minimum interference, and that kind of thing. And he sees the hypocrisy as well. So once again, like you nailed the theme that it turns out of this, is that how bipartisan these issues really are when you break them down and how much there is to it. So before we, I know you have a limited amount of time, but so I wanted to get to the reason why I invited you on today. Let us talk about the weather. So
small talk then.
I sort of sprung this on requesting Brian because as I was thinking about topics to discuss, I just could not escape that it's hot here in California right now, and then we're seeing all this news coming in. We've got in British Columbia, in Canada, we've had probably 500 heat-related deaths recently. A town north of Vancouver at 121 degrees this week is the hottest temperature ever recorded in Canada, and not a seasonal high, an all-time high, and that's this early in the year. And then just the Northwest is just getting roasted. Oregon, 117, Portland, 112, Seattle up into the hundreds. What is going on, and what can we be? So sort of let's narrow it down. So you spend a ton of time in the field. What is happening? Like what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean it's differential. Like really, in Colorado, this year hasn't been that bad. Like it's been hot. I mean, we've had plenty of days over 100 already. Last year was worse, but then like I lived and worked in Portland, Oregon for a number of years and still have a lot of connections and do some work out there. And yeah, like I watched in Portland 3 consecutive days, they broke the all-time historical record for heat. It had been 107 in 1985. They had one day that was 108, next day 112, next day 115 out at the Portland airport. But it's scorching, and I know people out there who have planted and don't know if their plants are going to take it. I have people out there that are still sitting on all their transplants, not willing to stick them in the field because it's just too hot and they're afraid everything will die if they stick them out there. But you know, then in the east part of the country, it's not as much drought and it's not as much heat as we've seen in previous years. So it's really depending on where you're at. Even within Colorado, heat and drought this year are terrible on the western slope, not too bad out on the eastern side of the state where it was kind of the opposite last year. So it's localized. Everyone, you know, kind of has to take a strategy that works for their production system. And one of the challenges I've heard of coming out of Oregon, down in Southern Oregon even, is that, you know, when you start having heat like this, one of the only ways you can really combat it is to make sure your plants aren't running out of water, because the only thing that makes heat stress way worse is combining it with drought stress. And so that's what everyone wants to do, but there's a lot of water restrictions that are coming down the pipeline right now for traditional crops as well as hemp and THC cannabis. So when they shut off your water and it gets up to 115 degrees, what do you do? I mean, it's like, depending on sheer luck of your weather patterns, your plants may or may not survive. And that's a big hit to farmers.
Yeah, I mean that's crazy. And when you say localized, you're right. You're 100% right, and especially because let's say Oregon gets killed, massive heat doesn't go away. Luckily, it's already dissipating. But let's say they get hit again. It's not
Yeah.
like, oh, because there's other markets, so you can just import in from Washington or you can import in
Right.
from. No, we're all stuck. So we're all stuck in these little micro economies of cannabis without
Yep.
interstate commerce, and so you can really suffer. That's too bad.
Yeah,
Um,
that's absolutely right.
Mhm. And then, do you have any sort of recommendations? So I know, like, you want to do maybe probably drop cloths to take the edge off. Anything
Well,
else?
it depends on your crop. I mean, like if you're a hemp farmer, there's no amount of like systems big enough to deal with. If you have even 50 acres planted, which is not all that much in the grand scheme of things. There's people out there planting thousands of acres. You can't shade cloth that. You can't do anything about it. The best you can hope to do is irrigate it and keep your fingers crossed. And so the good news is that the plants are resilient. Like I have been blown away at how many times I've thought like there's no way the plants are going to make it through this, and then they somehow make it through it. I've seen plants sliced in half by hail. I've seen them crushed under snow. I've seen plants, in a greenhouse where things go wrong, skyrocketing up, 150 degrees, and things will pull through often miraculously. I mean, there's always damage that occurs, and that's a hit to your yield. That's, it's any stress that a plant experiences, whether it's disease or insects or heat, drought, whatever. It's changing the course of the processes, and it makes it more challenging for the plants to do well. But they can handle short stints of pretty extreme heat. It's just the more it's sustained, the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes to fight it. And if you have access to unlimited water and you can irrigate your fields, awesome. If you live in a state where it's usually wet and you're going dry land and then you get hit with a drought, which I saw a few years back in the Southeast, you just have to take a loss. And so, I mean, everyone who's a farmer knows that. You also have the added complexity with the THC market of hits to quality, which is a whole other aspect. But it's certainly a challenge for farmers.
Yeah, let's talk about that hit to quality. So, the plants outdoor plants are native right now, right? They'll be flowering in the fall when it typically gets hot. What's the different impact when you've got flowers?
Yeah, I mean, plants are, resilient to different things at different times. If you're talking cold, it's better when they're seedlings. Heat, it can be rough on either side. I mean, if you're growing hemp for extraction, biomass, quality is less of a consideration in as far as like the appearance of the flowers, that sort of thing. It's all going to be ground and extracted anyways. So you're worried more about it affecting potency and yield, that sort of thing. But when it comes to THC crops, everyone knows that those have to move on a shelf, and there's absolutely a bag appeal aspect, as they call it in the industry. And as soon as your temps are out of spec, you're paying a price there. Your quality's going down, and certainly you can implement some fixes that you can't in larger scale production where you want to shade things out. But when you're shading a crop, it's not ideal either because you're pulling away sunlight, and that hurts them in their own right as well, slows down their rate of growth and that sort of thing. So it can help conserve water, and as someone who manages crops, it's really just making your best decisions that you can to mitigate stress and damage and maximize your potential. But it's not an easy thing, and it's certainly easier said than done. Did I lose you?